William Morrison sat in his small home office, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow taller each week. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty window, casting long shadows across the wooden desk his father had given him years ago. He rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at the clock on the wall. Kate would be home from school soon, and he still had not figured out how to tell her about the phone call he had received that morning. The call had come from Agent Sarah Collins with the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. Her voice had been professional but firm as she explained that William needed to come to their office for questioning regarding his late father's business activities. William had barely been able to speak as she mentioned terms like money laundering and tax evasion. His father had been dead for 2 years, and William thought all the legal matters had been settled long ago. Growing up, William had always believed his father ran a simple construction company. Robert Morrison had been a quiet man who worked long hours and came home covered in dust and concrete. He had provided well for his family, sending William to college and helping him buy his first house. There had never been any signs of wealth or suspicious activity. Robert drove an old pickup truck, wore simple clothes, and rarely talked about work at the dinner table. Kate's car pulled into the driveway, and William heard her footsteps on the front porch. She called out her usual greeting as she entered the house, but her voice carried a note of concern when he did not respond immediately. William had been married to Kate for 15 years, and she could read his moods better than anyone. He knew she would sense that something was wrong the moment she saw his face. Kate appeared in the doorway of his office, still wearing her teaching clothes and carrying a stack of student papers. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had that tired but satisfied look she always wore after a good day with her third-grade class. Her smile faded quickly when she saw William's expression. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her papers and moving closer to his desk. "You look like you have seen a ghost." William took a deep breath and told her about the phone call. He watched as Kate's face went through the same emotions he had experienced that morning. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a growing concern that settled in her eyes. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where they had made countless family decisions over the years. "But your father was just a construction worker," Kate said quietly. "He built houses and small buildings around town. Everyone knew him. He was respected in the community." "That is what I thought too," William replied, "but Agent Collins seemed to know things about Dad that I never heard before. She mentioned business partners I have never heard of and financial records that go back 20 years. Kate reached across the desk and took his hand. Her touch was warm and reassuring, just as it had been through every difficult moment they had faced together. They had weathered job losses, family illnesses, and the challenges of raising 2 teenagers. But this felt different. This threatened to shake the very foundation of what William believed about his own family. "When do you have to go see them?" Kate asked. "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, William answered. "She said I should bring a lawyer." The word lawyer hung in the air between them. Neither of them had ever needed legal representation before. They were ordinary people who paid their taxes, followed the rules, and tried to live good lives. The idea of hiring a lawyer felt foreign and frightening. That evening, William and Kate sat at their kitchen table with their 17-year-old son James and 15-year-old daughter Emma. The family had always been close, sharing their days and discussing both big and small problems together. But William found himself struggling to find the right words to explain what was happening. "Your grandfather might have been involved in some business dealings that the government wants to investigate," William finally said. "It probably does. Not mean anything serious, but I have to go answer some questions tomorrow." James looked up from his homework with a puzzled expression. "Grandpa Robert, he just built houses, right? What kind of business dealings we do not know yet," Kate answered, gently. "But whatever it is, we will handle it as a family. Your father has not done anything wrong." Emma, who had always been sensitive to family tensions, reached over and squeezed her father's arm. "It will be okay, Dad," she said. "Grandpa was a good man. There must be some mistake." William wished he could share his daughter's confidence, but the worry in Agent Collins' voice had suggested this was no simple mistake. He spent most of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember any conversations with his father that might have hinted at hidden business activities. The next morning, William dressed in his best suit and drove to the government building downtown. The lawyer Kate had found through a friend met him in the parking lot. Mr. Henderson was an older man with kind eyes and a calm manner that helped ease some of William's nervousness. Agent Collins turned out to be a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She led William and his lawyer to a small conference room where several boxes of documents waited on the table. The sight of all those papers made William's stomach turn. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Collins began, "we have been investigating a network of financial crimes that spans several decades. Your father's construction company appears to have been used to launder money for various illegal activities." William felt the room spinning slightly. "That is impossible," he said. "My father was an honest man. He worked hard every day." Agent Collins opened one of the boxes and pulled out a thick folder. Your father may have been honest in his personal life, but his business was connected to people who were not. We have evidence of cash payments that were far larger than any construction job would justify. We also have records of property purchases and sales that do not match the tax returns that were filed. As Agent Collins continued to explain the scope of the investigation, William realized that his entire understanding of his father's life had been built on incomplete information. The man he had admired and respected had apparently been living a double life that William had never suspected. The most shocking revelation came when Agent Collins mentioned that William himself might be considered a person of interest in the investigation. Despite his obvious surprise and confusion, the fact that he had inherited his father's assets made him legally connected to any crimes that might have been committed. William left the government building feeling like a stranger in his own life, knowing that everything he had believed about his family's history was about to change forever. William walked through his front door that evening, feeling like he was entering a stranger's house. Everything looked the same, the family photos on the hallway wall, Kate's teaching awards displayed on the shelf, the comfortable furniture they had saved for years to buy. But nothing felt the same. The conversation with Agent Collins had turned his entire world upside down in just 2 hours. Kate was waiting in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had clearly been watching for his car from the window. Her eyes searched his face as he walked in, and he could see that she had been crying. The stress of waiting all day had taken its toll on her usually calm demeanor. How bad is it? She asked, without any greeting. William sat down beside her and took her hands in his. They were cold, despite the warm spring weather. He tried to find words that would not frighten her more than necessary, but there was no gentle way to explain what he had learned. They think Dad was involved with money laundering, he said quietly. Not just a little bit. They are talking about millions of dollars over 20 years. Kate's face went pale. She had known Robert Morrison for almost 20 years, from the time she and William started dating in college. He had walked her down the aisle at their wedding when her own father was too ill to attend. He had been a loving grandfather to James and Emma, teaching them to fish and helping them with school projects. The idea that he had been living a secret life seemed impossible to accept, but how Kate whispered he lived in that same small house until he died. He drove that old truck. He never traveled anywhere fancy or bought expensive things. William had asked Agent Collins the same questions. The answer had been disturbing. According to the investigation, Robert Morrison had been very careful to maintain his simple lifestyle while secretly moving large amounts of money through his construction business. He had apparently been paid to handle cash transactions for people involved in drug trafficking and other illegal activities. They said he was what they call a money mule, William explained. He would receive large cash payments supposedly for construction jobs that either never happened or were much smaller than the payments suggested. Then he would deposit the money in various bank accounts and transfer it to other businesses that were also part of the scheme. Kate stood up and began pacing around the living room. This was what she did when she was trying to process difficult information. She had done the same thing when they received James's diagnosis of dyslexia and when her mother had been diagnosed with cancer. Walking helped her think through problems. Step by step, what does this mean for us? She asked. What does this mean for our family? This was the question William had been dreading. Agent Collins had explained that because William had inherited his father's assets, he might be considered legally responsible for returning any money that could be proven to come from illegal sources. The government could potentially seize their house, their savings, even William's small accounting practice if they could show it had been started with tainted money. They want to examine all of our financial records, William said. They want to know about every penny Dad ever gave us, or spent on us. The down payment he helped us make on this house, the money he gave us for the kids' college funds, even the gifts he gave the children at Christmas. Kate stopped pacing and stared at him. They think we knew about this. They think we were part of it. Agent Collins said she believes we had no knowledge of Dad's activities, William replied. But that does not matter legally. If we benefited from money that came from crimes, we might have to give it back. The sound of the front door opening interrupted their conversation. James came in from baseball practice, his uniform dirty and his hair messy from wearing his cap. He was humming one of the songs that had been playing on the radio during the team's bus ride home. His cheerful mood made the contrast with his parents' serious expressions even more stark. "Hey Mom, hey Dad," James called out as he headed toward the kitchen. "We won 7-3. Coach says if we keep playing like this, we might make it to the state tournament." William and Kate exchanged a look. They had agreed that morning to tell the children only what was absolutely necessary until they understood the full scope of the problem, but seeing James so happy and carefree made William realize how much their lives might be about to change. Emma arrived home 30 minutes later from her job at the local ice cream shop. At 15, she had started working part-time to save money for a car. She was proud of her independence and often talked about her plans for college. Both children had inherited their parents' strong work ethic and belief in doing the right thing. During dinner, William and Kate tried to maintain their normal family routine. They asked about James's game and Emma's day at work. They discussed weekend plans and reminded the children about upcoming school events. But the elephant in the room was growing larger with each passing minute. Finally, Emma put down her fork and looked directly at her father. "Dad, what is really going on? You and Mom have been acting strange ever since you went to that meeting today." William realized there was no point in trying to hide their concerns from the children any longer. James and Emma were old enough to understand that their family was facing a serious problem and they deserved to know what might happen to their lives. "The government believes your grandfather was involved in some illegal business activities," William said carefully. "They are investigating his financial records, and that investigation includes looking at our family's finances too." James looked confused. "But Grandpa just built houses and stuff." "What kind of illegal activities? We do not know all the details yet," Kate answered, "but it involves large amounts of money that might have come from criminal sources." Emma, who had always been the more perceptive of the two children, immediately understood the implications. "Does this mean we might lose our house?" The directness of her question caught William off guard, but he realized that honest communication was the only way their family would get through this crisis together. "It is possible," he admitted. "We are going to hire a good lawyer and fight to protect what we have built together. But yes, there is a chance we might lose some of our assets if the government can prove they came from illegal sources." The family sat in silence for several minutes, each of them trying to process what this news would mean for their future. Finally, Kate reached across the table and took William's hand. "Whatever happens," she said firmly, "we face it together as a family." The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers' meetings, sleepless nights, and growing tension throughout the Morrison household. William found himself unable to concentrate on his accounting clients, making simple mistakes that he had never made before in his 15-year career. Kate tried to maintain her normal routine at school, but her students noticed that their usually cheerful teachers seemed distracted and worried. Mr. Henderson, their lawyer, had been working tirelessly to understand the full scope of the government's case against Robert Morrison's estate. Each meeting brought new revelations that made William question everything he thought he knew about his father. The construction company that had seemed so straightforward had apparently been connected to a network of businesses involved in drug money laundering, illegal gambling operations, and tax evasion schemes. "Your father was very careful," Mr. Henderson explained during one of their meetings. "He kept his legitimate construction work separate from the illegal activities, at least on paper. But the government has bank records showing that he received payments of $50,000 or more for jobs that should have cost maybe $5,000. William stared at the documents spread across the lawyer's desk. Bank deposit slips, canceled checks, and business contracts painted a picture of systematic financial crime spanning 2 decades. The amounts involved were staggering. Over the course of 20 years, Robert Morrison had apparently processed more than $3 million in illegal money. "But where did all that money go?" William asked. "Dad lived in a modest house and drove an old truck. He never seemed to have much money." This was the question that had been bothering William the most. If his father had been handling such large amounts of money, why had the family never lived a wealthy lifestyle? The answer, according to the government's investigation, was that Robert Morrison had been paid a percentage of the money he laundered, but had been very careful to hide his profits. Agent Collins had scheduled another meeting with William for the following Tuesday. This time, she said, she had information about assets that William had inherited without knowing their true origin. The thought of facing another revelation about his father's secret life made William's stomach churn with anxiety. Kate had been trying to research everything she could about money laundering cases and what happened to families who unknowingly benefited from criminal activities. Late at night, after the children went to bed, she would sit at the kitchen table with her laptop, reading legal articles and news stories about similar cases. What she learned was not encouraging. "William," she said, one evening, "I found a case from Ohio where a family lost their house because the father had unknowingly used drug money to make the down payment. The family had no idea where the money came from, but the courts said it did not matter." William looked up from the financial documents he had been reviewing. His father's estate had included the family home, a small savings account, and some investments that William had inherited. Now, he was beginning to wonder if any of it was legitimately his. The stress was beginning to affect the entire family. James had been having trouble sleeping, and his grades at school were starting to slip. Emma had become quiet and withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room instead of hanging out with friends. Both children could sense that their parents were deeply worried about something that could change their lives forever. "Maybe we should tell them everything," Kate suggested one night as she and William lay in bed, both staring at the ceiling. "They are old enough to understand what we are facing." William had been thinking the same thing. James was 17 and would be starting his senior year of high school in the fall. Emma was 15 and had always been mature for her age. Both of them deserved to know that their plans for college might be affected by the investigation into their grandfather's activities. The next evening, William called a family meeting. He had never used such formal language with his children before, but the situation seemed to require it. They gathered in the living room, with James and Emma sitting on the couch and William and Kate in the chairs facing them. "We need to talk about what is happening with the investigation into Grandpa's business," William began. "The situation is more serious than we initially thought." He explained what the government believed Robert Morrison had been doing and what it might mean for their family's financial future. He told them about the possibility of losing their house and about the legal battles that might lie ahead. Most importantly, he explained that none of them had done anything wrong, but that sometimes innocent people suffered consequences from other people's crimes. Emma was the first to speak. "How long have you and Mom known about this?" "We found out the same day I told you," William answered. "We have been trying to understand the situation before discussing it with you." James had been listening quietly, but now he looked directly at his father. "Dad, do you think Grandpa really did these things? I mean, this does not sound like the Grandpa we knew." This was the question that had been tearing at William's heart for weeks. The man who had taught him to play baseball, who had attended every school play and graduation ceremony, who had been a loving and devoted grandfather, could that same man have been involved in serious criminal activities? "I do not know," William admitted. "The evidence seems very strong, but I cannot understand how the Grandpa we knew could have been living such a different life without any of us knowing about it." Kate reached over and took William's hand. "What we do know is that our family has always been built on honesty and love. Whatever your grandfather may have done, it does not change who we are or what we believe in." Agent Collins called the next morning with news that would change everything. She had information about a safety deposit box that had been registered in William's name when he turned 18. The box had been maintained for over 20 years, with all fees paid through an anonymous trust fund. "I need you to come in tomorrow morning," Agent Collins said. "We believe this safety deposit box may contain evidence that is crucial to our investigation. You will need to open it in the presence of federal agents." William's hands were shaking. As he hung up the phone, a safety deposit box in his name that he had never known about could only mean one thing. His father had been planning for this day for a very long time. He called Kate at school and asked her to take the day off tomorrow. Whatever was in that safety deposit box was going to reveal the final truth about Robert Morrison's secret life, and William knew he would need Kate's strength to face whatever they discovered. The drive to the bank the next morning felt like the longest journey of William's life. William stood in front of the First National Bank building, his hands trembling as he gripped the keys Agent Collins had given him. Kate stood beside him, her face pale but determined. Mr. Henderson, their lawyer, checked his watch and reminded them that they needed to meet Agent Collins and her team inside the bank in exactly 10 minutes. The morning air was crisp, but William felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature. He had spent the entire night wondering what could be inside a safety deposit box that had been registered in his name without his knowledge. The possibilities ranged from family documents to evidence that could destroy everything he had worked for in his life. Agent Collins was waiting for them in the bank lobby, along with 2 other federal investigators and a court stenographer who would record everything they found. The bank manager, Mr. Peterson, looked nervous as he led the group toward the safety deposit box area. This was clearly not a normal day at the small community bank. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Collins said as they walked through the secure area, "I want you to understand that whatever we find in this box, your cooperation today will be noted in our final report. The fact that you clearly had no knowledge of this box's existence works in your favor." William nodded, but he was not sure he could speak. His throat felt dry and his heart was beating so fast that he worried everyone could hear it. Kate walked close beside him, occasionally reaching out to touch his arm in a gesture of support that helped keep him grounded. The safety deposit box area was in the basement of the bank, behind multiple locked doors and security cameras. Box number 247 was located in the middle section of the wall, neither the largest nor the smallest size available. Mr. Peterson inserted his master key first, then stepped back to allow William to use his key. "Take your time, Mr. Henderson," whispered to William. "Remember that you are not responsible for anything your father may have done." William inserted his key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the small room. Agent Collins and her team positioned themselves where they could see everything clearly while still giving William enough space to examine the contents. The box was deeper than William had expected. As he pulled it out from the wall, he could see that it was packed with papers, envelopes, and several small items wrapped in cloth. The weight surprised him. Whatever was inside was substantial. Agent Collins gestured toward a table in the center of the room. "Please place everything on the table so we can examine it together." William's hands shook as he began removing items from the box. The first thing he pulled out was a thick manila envelope with his name written on it in his father's familiar handwriting. Seeing that handwriting after all these months of shocking revelations about his father's secret life brought tears to William's eyes. Open the envelope, Agent Collins instructed gently. Inside the envelope were several documents and a letter, addressed to William. The letter was dated just 6 months before his father's death, suggesting that Robert Morrison had known his time was running short and had wanted to leave some kind of explanation for his son. William unfolded the letter with trembling fingers and began to read aloud at Agent Collins' request. His father's words were carefully chosen and filled with pain and regret. Dear William, the letter began, if you are reading this, then the truth about my business activities has finally come to light. I know this must be devastating for you, and Kate, and the children. I want you to know that everything I did was to protect our family from people who would have hurt us if I had refused to cooperate. William's voice broke as he continued reading. His father explained that he had become involved with money laundering activities almost by accident 20 years earlier. A construction job for what seemed like a legitimate client had turned into something much more dangerous when William discovered that his client was connected to organized crime. They told me I could either help them clean their money through my business or face consequences that would affect not just me, but my entire family, the letter continued. I was terrified of what they might do to you or your mother or Kate, and the children saw I agreed to help them, telling myself it would only be temporary. Kate moved closer to William as he read, placing her hand on his shoulder for support. The room was completely silent except for William's voice and the soft sound of the stenographer typing every word. The letter went on to explain that Robert Morrison had tried multiple times over the years to extract himself from the criminal organization, but each time he was told that he knew too much to simply walk away. Instead of letting him go, they had increased the amounts of money he was required to process through his construction business. I saved every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence that could help the authorities prosecute the people who forced me into this situation. The letter explained, I also saved money from the fees they paid me, not for personal gain, but as a form of insurance. I knew that someday this would all come to light, and I wanted to make sure my family would be protected. Agent Collins leaned forward with interest as William continued reading. His father had apparently been keeping detailed records of every illegal transaction he had been forced to handle, including names, dates, amounts, and methods of money transfer. This information could be incredibly valuable to the government's investigation. The next items William removed from the safety deposit box were computer disks, flash drives, and folders filled with photocopied documents. There were bank statements, business contracts, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of people William did not recognize. Your father was essentially working as an undercover informant for the last several years of his life, Agent Collins realized as she examined the materials. These records could help us prosecute dozens of people involved in this criminal network. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, was a small recorder and several dozen cassette tapes. Each tape was labeled with dates spanning the last 5 years of Robert Morrison's life. He recorded conversations, William whispered, as he realized what his father had been doing. He recorded conversations with the people who were forcing him to launder money. Agent Collins's eyes widened as she saw the potential value of these recordings. Voice recordings of criminal conspirators discussing money laundering operations would be incredibly powerful evidence in federal court. The final item in the box was a bank book for an account William had never heard of. The account contained nearly $200,000, money that Robert Morrison had apparently been setting aside as compensation for his family for the damage his forced cooperation with criminals might cause to their lives. William sat down heavily in one of the chairs, overwhelmed by the realization that his father had not been a willing criminal, but rather a victim who had spent years trying to protect his family, while gathering evidence to eventually bring down the organization that had threatened them. The drive home from the bank felt completely different from the terrifying journey they had taken that morning. William sat in the passenger seat while Kate drove, both of them still processing the incredible revelations they had discovered in the safety deposit box. The cassette tapes, documents, and bank records had painted a picture of Robert Morrison that was heartbreaking and heroic at the same time. Agent Collins had spent 2 hours examining every piece of evidence in the box. Her excitement had grown with each new document and recording they uncovered. She explained to William and Kate that Robert Morrison had essentially been building a case against the criminal organization that had forced him into money laundering activities for over 20 years. Your father was braver than he probably ever realized, Agent Collins had told William as they prepared to leave the bank. The evidence he collected is going to help us prosecute people we have been trying to catch for decades. He may have saved other families from going through what your family has experienced. The recordings were particularly valuable because they captured conversations between Robert Morrison and various members of the criminal organization. On the tapes, the criminals could be heard threatening Robert and his family, discussing specific money laundering operations and planning other illegal activities. The quality of the recordings was surprisingly good, suggesting that Robert had been very careful about how and when he made them. Mr. Henderson had explained that the discovery of these materials would fundamentally change William's legal situation. Instead of being viewed as someone who had benefited from criminal activities, William was now seen as the son of a victim who had been forced to participate in crimes against his will. The government would still need to examine the family's finances, but the tone of the investigation had shifted dramatically. "The money in that bank account your father set up," Mr. Henderson had explained. "That represents compensation for the trauma and legal troubles he knew his situation would eventually cause your family. The government will most likely allow you to keep that money as a form of restitution." Kate had started crying in the bank when she realized what Robert Morrison had endured to protect his family. The man she had known as a loving father and grandfather had been living with constant fear and stress for decades. Every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every quiet moment had been shadowed by his knowledge that his secret could destroy the people he loved most. When they arrived home, James and Emma were waiting anxiously in the living room. Both teenagers had stayed home from school because they were too worried to concentrate on their classes. They looked up hopefully as their parents walked through the door, searching their faces for any sign of good news. William sat down between his children on the couch and took a deep breath. He had been dreading this conversation for weeks, but now he had a very different story to tell than the one he had been expecting. "Your grandfather was not a criminal," William began. "He was forced to help criminals because they threatened to hurt our family if he refused. For 20 years, he lived with that fear while secretly collecting evidence to help the police catch the people who were threatening us." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her father explain what they had discovered in the safety deposit box. The grandfather she had loved and admired had not betrayed his family's trust. Instead, he had sacrificed his own peace of mind and reputation to keep them safe. James asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. "So we are not going to lose our house?" "No," Kate answered, reaching over to hug her son. "The government now understands that Grandpa was a victim, not a willing participant in criminal activities. We will keep our home and our savings. In fact, Grandpa left money for us to help make up for all the worry and legal expenses we have had to deal with." Over the following weeks, the Morrison family began to heal from the trauma of the investigation. Agent Collins kept them informed about the progress of the case against the criminal organization that had controlled Robert Morrison's life for so many years. The evidence he had collected was helping prosecutors build cases against more than 30 people involved in money laundering, drug trafficking, and other serious crimes. William returned to his accounting practice with a new appreciation for the honest work he did every day. His clients had been understanding about his recent distraction, and several had even offered to help his family if they needed financial support during the investigation. The small-town community that had known and respected Robert Morrison was relieved to learn that their trust in him had been justified. Kate threw herself back into her teaching with renewed energy. Her students noticed that their teacher seemed happier and more relaxed than she had been in months. She used the experience as a teaching moment, helping her third graders understand that sometimes people face difficult situations that require them to make brave choices to protect the people they love. James's grades improved dramatically once the stress of the investigation was lifted. He was accepted to 3 different colleges and decided to study criminal justice. Inspired by his grandfather's courage in gathering evidence against dangerous criminals, Emma started a school project about families who had been affected by organized crime, wanting to help other people understand that victims of criminal organizations often suffered in silence. The criminal trials began 6 months later. William was called to testify about his father's character and the impact the forced money laundering had on their family. Standing in the federal courthouse, he spoke proudly about Robert Morrison's integrity and his sacrifice to protect his loved ones. Agent Collins testified about the value of the evidence Robert Morrison had collected over the years. She explained to the jury that his careful documentation and secret recordings had provided law enforcement with their most complete picture ever of how the criminal organization operated. 12 members of the organization were convicted on various charges, including money laundering, drug trafficking, and extortion. Several received prison sentences of more than 20 years. The leader of the group, a man named Vincent Torres who had first approached Robert Morrison 20 years earlier, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day the final verdicts were announced, William stood outside the courthouse with Kate, James, and Emma. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe freely. His father's name had been cleared, his family's future was secure, and justice had been served for the criminals who had caused so much pain and fear. That evening, the Morrison family visited Robert Morrison's grave for the first time since learning the truth about his secret life. William placed fresh flowers on the headstone and spoke quietly to his father. "Thank you, Dad," he said. "Thank you for protecting us and for never giving up hope that someday the truth would come out." As they walked back to their car, Kate took William's hand and smiled. Their family had survived the greatest challenge they had ever faced. And they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The door that had hidden Robert Morrison's painful secret had finally been opened, revealing not shame and criminality, but love, sacrifice, and quiet heroism that would inspire them. For the rest of their lives,